Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final part of PJR's four-part webinar series on the IATF 16949 transition. In today's presentation, we'll be reviewing sections 861 of the standard all the way through till the end in section 10. All participants have been muted to ensure sound quality. At the end of today's prepared presentation, we'll certainly open up the floor to any questions that you may have on the transition process, changes to Rules 5th edition, or any questions on any content in the standard. So starting with 861, here we see in this section entitled Release of Products and Services, an expectation that planned arrangements to verify product and service requirements have been met have to be outlined in the control plan. So those process controls to ensure that product service requirements are met need to be detailed in the control plan. Although not explicitly mentioned in the content of 861 in IATF 16949 itself, the last bullet indicates the industry's intent that to achieve coherence between the control plan and the planned arrangements, the organization should be conducting regular control plan audits to compare the current approval status of the product and process with the actual controls applied in the manufacturing process. Now, keep in mind that through the internal audit requirements, there is a requirement for a manufacturing process audit. And we're going to get to that when we talk about section 9221. But in this manufacturing process audits, one of the things you're going to want to do is walk the control plan. So there's some overlap between that clause in section 9 and this 861. In 862, there's simply an added note, not a real change here. Layout inspection shall be done at a frequency determined by the customer. Fairly straightforward. 863, appearance items. Here we introduce a new technology in the form of haptic technology, which recreates the sense of touch by applying forces, vibrations, or motions to the user. And if necessary, depending on your type of product applied, you may have to provide a master for haptic technology as needed. 864, verification and acceptance of conformity of externally provided products and services. Simply a clarification here, and that clarification comes in 864A, that receipt and evaluation of statistical data is that data provided by the supplier to the organization. So if you're using that as your verification method for externally provided products, processes, or services, it's statistical data provided by the supplier to the organization. 865, statutory and regulatory conformity. Prior to using externally provided products or component parts in the organization's manufacturing process, it's incumbent on the organization to confirm and provide evidence that externally provided products or services conform to applicable statutory regulatory requirements where the manufacturing is happening and in the customer identified countries of destination if that's provided. 866 is really a clarification, clarified where required to be where appropriate or required. Really no major change to intent here. 8711, customer authorization for concession. A lot of this is a carryover from ISO TS 16949. You need to obtain a customer concession or deviation prior to further processing whenever your product or manufacturing process is going to be different from that which was currently approved. You have to obtain customer authorization prior to further processing for a use as is or rework disposition. You need to maintain a record of the expiration date or quantity authorized under concession. You need to ensure that material shipped under concession is properly identified on each shipping container, whether it's finished product or purchased product. And you need to approve any requests from suppliers before submission to the customer. 8712, simply a statement that the organization needs to comply with applicable customer specified controls for non-conforming product. 8713, control of suspect product. Not really a change in intent here. Ensure that product with an unidentified or suspect status is treated and controlled the same as non-conforming product. And manufacturing personnel need to be trained on this as well. This training should encompass product safety, escalation process, appropriate storage areas, etc. 8714, control of reworked product. Here we see that the organization shall use risk analysis, an example, most common example being the FEMA, to assess risks in the rework process prior to making a decision to rework product. And as required by customer, you need to get approval prior to commencing rework. You need to have a documented process for rework confirmation in accordance with your control plan. Instructions for disassembly or rework need to be accessible and utilized by personnel, and you need to retain documented information on the disposition of rework product, including the quantity allowed, disposition date, and applicable traceability information. So again, incorporating your control plan and having a documented process for rework. Here we see that 8715, control of repaired product, and 8714, control of reworked product, have a lot of the same requirements. So they're essentially mirrors of each other. The changes here clarify the requirement and the need to follow up with detailed information for reworked product. But a lot of the same requirements relative to retaining documented information on the disposition of repaired product, including the quantity allowed, what the disposition was, the date it was made, and traceability information. 8716, this is a new addition. It's a specific section called customer notification. And although customer notification was mentioned in TS 16949, there was not a standalone section on customer notification. And essentially, the organization is required to immediately notify the customer if they ship non-conforming product and follow up with detailed documentation. (8717). Non-conforming product disposition. There needs to be a documented process for disposition of non-conforming product that can't be reworked or repaired. And included in this requirement, the organization needs to verify that product that cannot be reworked or repaired, essentially product that's going to be scrapped, is rendered unusable prior to disposal. This is actually, I think, a fairly significant change. borrowed from aerospace. So it's not enough to just put it in a scrap bin. It has to be rendered permanently unusable. And the intent was to prevent diversion for service or any other use on any other type of market. The industry wants to see that the scrap product is rendered permanently unusable to prevent that. And again, we need a documented process for this. Okay, moving into section 9111, monitoring and measurement of manufacturing processes. Organizations have to perform process studies on all new manufacturing processes. This includes assembly and sequencing processes to verify process capability. There is a note that clarifies that it may not be possible or feasible to measure product or manufacturing process characteristics through a process capability assessment. Rate or index of lot conformity may be acceptable depending on the type of process. The organization then has to maintain manufacturing process capability and performance as specified by the part approval process requirements. Organization has to ensure that the process flow diagram, control plan, and FEMA are implemented and maintained, including adherence to measurement techniques, sampling plans, acceptance criteria, records of actual measurement values or test results, and reaction plans when acceptance criteria are not met. And a lot of this is carryover from TS 16949. Significant process events, tool change, machine repair need to be recorded and maintained as documented information. Organization shall initiate the reaction plan that's indicated on the control plan for characteristics that are either not statistically capable or unstable. And this reaction plan, just as in TS 16949, needs to include containment of product and 100% inspection. And the organization's required to maintain records of effective dates of process changes. Statistical tools and techniques are covered in 9112 and 9113. The organization's required to determine the appropriate use of statistical tools and need to be included in the control plan. (9113) application of statistical concepts. Statistical concepts, and they give examples: variation, stability, capability, the consequences of operators doing adjustments need to be understood and used by employees that are involved in the collection, analysis, and management of statistical data. So when employees are, using some type of off-the-shelf program to gather statistics on parts that have been run, they need to understand what they're looking at and what the consequences are, and when do they get something when it appears, when do they get someone when it appears something has gone wrong. Auditors will typically assess that through interview. 9121, customer satisfaction supplemental. Organizations need to monitor on a continual basis internal and external performance indicators to ensure on-time, on-quality performance. Performance indicators to be included, but not necessarily limited to these performance indicators, are listed in A through E in the standard: delivered part quality performance, customer disruptions, field returns, recalls, warranty issues, delivery scheduled performance, including instances of premium freight, and customer notifications related to quality or delivery issues, including customer special status notifications. The organization has to monitor the performance of manufacturing processes to demonstrate compliance with customer requirements for product quality and process efficiency. And the monitoring has to include the review of customer performance data, including online customer portals and customer scorecards where provided. And in fact, in auditor training, we've been instructed as third-party auditors that if an organization can't access the customer portal and the customer scorecard, then an automatic major should be written. And remember, earlier in the standard, the organization is required to identify which personnel in the organization are accessing logistics information, customer scorecards, customer portals, and that's covered in 531. A suggestion was made that perhaps a matrix would identify who those people are, not necessarily the only way to do it. (9131) prioritization. Here there's an emphasis of the requirement that was previously in TS 16949, analysis of data, to the prioritization of actions based on performance and risk management. So essentially you're not just analyzing the data, you're of course looking at the data, you're analyzing it and prioritizing actions for improvement based on risk. Obviously, in the forefront of this would be actions taken to improve customer satisfaction. 9221 talks about an internal audit program. Previously in TS 16949, there was a requirement for a procedure. Here it spells out that the organization shall have a documented internal audit process. Again, suggesting defined inputs, outputs, planned activities, and monitoring of performance of the internal audit program. A comprehensive internal audit program is, of course, going to include your quality management system audits, essentially an audit to ensure the organization is meeting the requirements of IATF 16949 with any applicable customer-specific requirements integrated into that process-based audit. Manufacturing process audits, we talked about that earlier when we covered 861, essentially walking the control plan and product audits. Your audit program shall be risk-based, driven by internal and external performance trends. If you're responsible for software development, this needs to be included in your internal audit program, specifically software development capability. Your audit program has to be planned, and the frequency of audits shall be reviewed and adjusted based on performance of the system. An increase in customer complaints in an area should lead to an increase in audits, for example. 9222 talks about the first type of audit, a quality management system audit. And the organization needs to plan to audit all quality management system processes over each 3-year calendar period according to an annual program using the automotive process approach. So that said a lot. So essentially you have to cover all requirements of IATF 16949, ISO 9001:2015, and any customer specific requirements in at least a 3-year period. But there has to be an annual plan showing what's going to be covered in each calendar year. And the approach used to conduct audits shall be the automotive process approach. 9223 talks about the manufacturing process audit. Each manufacturing process needs to be covered over a 3-year calendar period to determine effectiveness and efficiency. Using the customer specified approach, unless one is not mentioned, the organization can then determine the approach to be used. Each manufacturing process shall be audited on all shifts where it occurs and include an appropriate sampling of the shift handover. And included in a robust manufacturing process audit shall include the FEMA, the control plan, and any associated documents. 9224 talks about the product audit. Products shall be audited using the customer specified approach at appropriate stages of production and then delivery to verify conformity to specified requirements. And if an approach is not defined by the customer, the organization shall define the approach to be used. 9311 discusses management review. Management review needs to be conducted at least annually. Again, it's risk-based. The frequency of management review shall be increased if there's a risk to compliance with customer requirements resulting from internal, external changes or performance issues. 9321, management review input supplemental. There have been some additions in management review input requirements. Cost of poor quality is explicitly mentioned. Process effectiveness and efficiency measures, product conformance, manufacturing feasibility, customer satisfaction, maintenance objectives, warranty, customer scorecards, potential field failures, and actual field failures. (9331) management review output supplemental. Top management needs to document and implement an action plan when customer performance targets are not being met. Now remember, you also want to make sure you're meeting any 9001/2015 input and output requirements as well. (1023) discusses problem solving. The organization needs to have a documented process for problem solving. And this documented process needs to include the approach to be used for various types and scales of issues. Obviously, an internal audit finding may use a different problem-solving tool or technique than a customer complaint. Any robust problem-solving needs to include containment, which would include an extent analysis, interim actions, and related activities necessary for controlling non-conforming outputs, root cause analysis, systemic corrective actions, including the corrective action impact concept, verification of effectiveness, and then updating as necessary living documents such as the FEMA and control plan. And if the customer specifies a specific tool, obviously you have to use that. 1024 is error proofing. The organization, again, here's a requirement for a documented process to determine the use of appropriate error proofing methodologies. Any error proofing methodologies used shall be documented in the control plan. And remember, in last week's presentation, we talked about in 85611 temporary changes of process controls, that if your primary method, your error proofing, for example, goes down, your control plan needs to document the alternate method, alternate control method used, how it's going to be used, and how it's going to be controlled. So your error proofing method itself needs to be documented in the control plan, including how you test whether its effectiveness, dummy parts, whatever it is you use to test it. And you have to maintain records of those tests, challenge parts, etc. Challenge parts need to be identified, controlled, verified, and calibrated. 1025 is warranty management systems. If warranty is a requirement, the organization shall implement a warranty management process. Included in this process shall be a method for analysis of parts, including no trouble found. And any customer specified requirements for warranty must be followed. 1026, customer complaints and field failure test analysis. New requirement here related to the concept of embedded software. When applicable, the analysis needs to include the interaction of embedded software on the organization's product within the system of the final customer's product. And in a general sense, the organization shall communicate the results of testing and analysis to the customer and within the organization. And finally, finishing up with 10.3.1, continual improvement supplemental. Organization now has to have a documented process for continual improvement. Included in this process should be identification of the methodology used, a manufacturing process improvement plan with emphasis on reduction of process variation and waste, and use of risk analysis tools such as FEMA. And essentially, you're going to be doing that anyway. Again, the note is made that essentially you can't work on continual improvement until all processes are stable and capable and product characteristics are predictable and meet customer requirements. So just kind of summarizing some of the themes related to these changes. Essentially, many of the changes have been made to increase the value and credibility of certification, considering the input from all of the stakeholders. Many common customer-specific requirements across the customer base were integrated as requirements. And with IATF 16949, we see a further strengthening the performance linkages between OEMs, suppliers, CBs, and the oversight offices. So in just under a half hour this time, we've wrapped up the last part of this 4-part webinar series, reviewing the requirements in sections 861 all the way through the end of 10. I'll now open the floor to any questions that you may have. And again, as all participants have been muted to ensure sound quality, please type your questions into the question feature and I'll answer as many of these as I can. Today's webinar is being recorded and a playback will be available within 24 to 48 hours after the conclusion of the webinar, and you'll be able to download a copy of the slides. All this is available at www.pjr.com. And it's also there where you'll be able to get information on upcoming webinars on IATF 16949 or other topics. Okay, a lot of questions coming in. Bear with me as I go through them. Some of them are very long. Okay, Billy, I'm seeing some of your questions all in a series here. If in your first question about customer approval, if you could cite the requirement and the standard that you're talking about, because remember now there's the customer notification section, some customer approval relative to repair and reworked product. If you could let me know what you're getting at there. John, to address your question on 8714 and 8715, repair and rework. (8714) says that if required by the customer, the organization shall obtain approval from the customer prior to commencing rework of the product. Under repair, it says the organization shall obtain approval from the customer before commencing repair of the product. So there's a slight difference there. Always in the case of repair, you have to obtain approval. And then in the case of rework, because remember the difference between rework and repair is that in rework, you're bringing it back up to spec. It's if required by the customer, you shall obtain approval prior to commencing rework. Okay, we're getting a question on something we covered last time, 8521 traceability. Specifically, I think, Tim, your question relates to the second paragraph. The organization shall conduct an analysis of internal customer and regulatory traceability requirements for all automotive products, including developing and documenting traceability plans based on the levels of risk or failure severity for employees, customers, and consumers. I do not think it's appropriate to assume that the current system that's been in place regarding traceability for a number of years is necessarily conforming. Grandfathering is, I would say, not acceptable. You need to make sure that, my guess would be that in many cases when you develop traceability that regulatory requirements may not have been considered, and you're going to need to be able to prove that in your IATF 16949 audit. $8714, just a clarification for you, John. Remember, if you're doing rework, you have to notify the customer if required by the customer. So you have to check and see what your customer specific requirements say. Billy, if you could provide clarification on your questions. I don't know if you're looking at 865 for externally provided products. Not sure what you're getting at there, if you could provide clarification. Tim, I'm seeing another question from you, and you seem to be citing 58611, which doesn't exist. I'm going to assume that you mean 85. Getting there. 85611 as opposed to 58611. The organization shall review the operation of alternate process controls on a daily basis at a minimum to verify implementation of standard work with the goal to return to the standard process as defined by the control plan. Does this mean the organization shall review the alternate process controls daily only when they're using the alternate process, or review alternate process daily even if you're not using the alternate method? It means the former, that if you are in a position where you're using the alternate process control, you have to validate its performance, perhaps through a layered process audit or daily leadership meetings. Those are the two examples cited, only when it's being used. See if we get any more questions. We'll wait just a few more minutes to see if any other questions come in. Okay, getting clarification on a question asked by Billy earlier, related to non-conforming product. And if the product's being reworked and the customer purchase order, and you want to be clear any customer specific requirements not in the purchase order as well, Billy, do not specify that the customer has to approve rework. Does the organization need to address the FEMA and request for customer approval for each non-conforming product? Yes, this needs to be outlined in your FEMA and control plan and any other relevant documentation, work instructions for the rework process itself. The only thing essentially you're not doing is getting approval prior to commencing the rework, but all these other requirements remain. Okay, folks, it looks like that's all the questions we have. I appreciate your time today and hope this 4-part webinar series was helpful. Again, visit www.pgr.com to access full recordings of this 4-part series, as well as obtain information on previously recorded and upcoming webinars.